Stay tuned for another Newscenter88 presentation on WMUL FM Huntington. And now, the Newscenter88 Weekend Recap, covering the top stories around the globe, tri-state, and across the campus of Marshall University. And now, the Newscenter88 Weekend Recap team.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Newscenter88's Weekend Recap. I'm Emma Johnson.
And I'm Waylon Smith. Coming up on this edition of Weekend Recap, Julia McAndrews will be in with this week's weather forecast, and John Boggess will be in with a recap of the week that was in Marshall athletics.
Now, onto our top story. A jury in Michigan has heard closing arguments and started deliberating in a case of a Michigan school shooter's father. Deliberations resumed Thursday, and the prosecutors told jurors Wednesday that James Crumbley had a, quote, legal duty, unquote, to prevent Ethan Crumbley from harming others at Oxford High School, especially when he knew about apparent mental health problems. James Crumbley is charged with involuntary manslaughter in the deaths of 4 students in 2021. He's accused of failing to secure a gun at home and doing nothing when confronted with the signs of his son's mental distress. Crumbley's defense attorney says the father had no idea what his son would do.
Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has appointed his longtime economic advisor to be the next prime minister. The appointment came in the face of U.S. pressure to reform the Palestinian Authority as part of Washington's post-war vision for Gaza. Mahmoud Mustafa is a U.S.-educated economist and political independent. He will head a technocratic government in the Israeli-occupied West Bank that could potentially administer Gaza ahead of eventual statehood. But those plans face major obstacles, which include strong opposition from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, which is still grinding on with no end in sight.
تحت تصرف السيد الرئيس وذلك يوم الثلاثاء الماضي 20/24.
As Vladimir Putin heads for another 6-year term as Russia's president, there's little electoral drama in the race. But what he does after he crosses the finish line, however, is what is drawing attention and, for many observers, provoking anxiety. The voting that concludes on Sunday is all but certain to allow Putin to remain in office until 2030, giving him a full 3 decades of leading Russia as either president or prime minister. The heft of that long tenure and the thorough suppression of effective domestic opposition voices gives Putin a very strong hand. That's bolstered by the surprising resilience in the economy and Moscow's consistent military advances in Ukraine and flagging support for aid to Kyiv from Washington and other quarters.
Какие сложные вызовы стоят перед нами практически во всех сферах. И чтобы продолжать достойно отвечать на них, успешно преодолевать трудности.
Coming up, protesters gathered on Marshall's campus in response to a preacher. Stay with us for a recap of news across the tri-state and the campus of Marshall when we return.
I can't make it.
Luke.
Ben, is that you?
You must go to the Marshall system. There you shall seek out WMUL FM and be trained in the ways of news, sports, and the widest variety of music in the tri-state.
But how, Ben?
Use the Force, Luke. Let it guide you to 88.1 on the dial. And remember, WMUL's Force will always be with you.
Welcome back to Newscenter88's Weekend Recap. I'm Emma Johnson.
And I'm Waylon Smith. On Thursday, Marshall's Memorial Student Center Plaza flooded with protesters after a controversial preacher arrived on campus. As Luke Hamilton reports, the preacher's message caused the largest protest on campus since an anti-abortion group visited in April of 2023.
The screams and chants of protesters reverberated on Marshall's campus after a preacher named Brother Ray arrived. A Marshall student and leader of the Appalachian Liberation Collective says the man grabbed the attention of spectators early on.
I had a friend message me that he was talking about LGBTQ plus people, reading off hateful Bible verses and kind of not reading them correctly as well, and harassing a lot of students that were walking by. So we decided to come down and encourage a lot of our club members and people that we knew to come down.
Brother Ray, who declined to provide his last name, says that God sent him to Marshall because a student could die during spring break. Ray says that protests were expected.
People are hostile to the truth. It's a generation that's been deceived. They've been deceived to think that evil is good and good is evil. So when you come preach truth and they're living in evil, the backlash is almost automatic.
This student didn't have a problem with a preacher on campus, but felt the need to protest because of Ray's comments.
It's fine and it's wonderful, but not when you're spreading hate speech about my friends.
Some used chalk or signs to protest. Others audibly mocked the preacher.
This man sucks, stinks, boo, go home.
A Christian student says,
"Don't use this as your example for Christianity."
He also says that both the protesters and the preacher used the wrong methods to cause change.
God's kindness leads us to repentance. And this is not love. Like, it's one side yelling at another side. They're screaming obscene things. They're attacking each other based off of appearances. The crowd literally told this guy that his wife was going to leave him for a high schooler.
Ray's wife, Brittany, failed to mention her last name, but asked to be called Sister Ray. She says that her husband's methods were intentional.
I think he's trying to provoke people to thought of what happens after you die.
It's frankly ridiculous, and I don't think that it has any place at a college campus, especially how diverse Huntington and how diverse Marshall is in general.
The student says this message spoken by Ray was unacceptable.
Oh, you're gonna go to hell, you're so evil, and the things that you do just because you like to kiss men or women.
Even the protesters realized that the uproar Ray caused could turn Christians away from their own religion.
Genuinely, there are Christians out there who are compassionate and loving and supportive of everyone, but when people like that come here, it shows the nasty side of Christianity that gives it a bad name, that makes people go away from the religion.
Although the students protesting Ray were both visibly and audibly upset, they agreed that it all starts with approachability.
And I think instead of the guy just screaming, he could just have a kinder, more gentle conversation.
As students go home or on vacation for spring break, they might have a hard time forgetting about the madness that unfolded on Marshall's campus. For Newscenter88, I'm Luke Hamilton.
Coming up next, a congressional hearing on the Biden classified documents probe turns into a proxy campaign battle. Stay with us for a recap of news from around the nation when News Center 88 returns right after this.
The worldwide leader in Marshall University sports coverage.
Welcome back to Raleigh, North Carolina, here high atop Carter Finley Stadium.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome inside Memorial Coliseum in Lexington, Kentucky. The Thundering Herd will be taking on the number 22 team in the country.
Here in the fifth oldest stadium in college football, Nippert Stadium. Inside Value City Arena at Jerome Schottenstein Center.
The Cutting Edge Sports Radio Network.
Welcome back to the News Center 88 Weekend Recap. I'm Emma Johnson.
And I'm Waylon Smith. House Republicans huddled in West Virginia for a strategy planning retreat designed to unify the often fractious conference as they head into the final months before their November election. But many didn't bother to show up. It was the first annual retreat for House Speaker Mike Johnson since he took the Speaker's gavel late last year. Now he's trying to figure out how to navigate a razor-thin majority through a series of legislative hurdles. Many issues divide Republicans, including military aid for Ukraine, finishing government funding, and reauthorizing a federal surveillance program.
I got indicted for nothing, for something that is nothing. They were doing it because it's election interference. And then I got indicted a second time, and a third time, and a fourth time.
The judge overseeing the Georgia 2020 election interference case has dismissed some of the charges against ex-President Donald Trump, but others remain. Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee wrote Wednesday in an order that 6 of the charges in the indictment must be squashed, including 3 against Trump. The order leaves intact many other charges in the indictment. The judge wrote that prosecutors could seek a new indictment on the charges he dismissed, but the 6 charges in question have to do with soliciting elected officials to violate their oaths in office. One of the counts stemmed from a phone call Trump made to fellow Republican Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger on January 2nd, 2021, and Trump denies any wrongdoing.
We identified evidence that the president willfully retained classified materials after the end of his vice presidency when he was a private citizen.
Special counsel Robert Hur says politics played no part in his investigation or report into President Joe Biden's handling of classified documents. Lawmakers have turned a hearing on the matter into a proxy battle between the Democratic president and Republican frontrunner Donald Trump. The House Judiciary Committee hearing Tuesday played out as a transcript of Biden's testimony last fall shows he insisted he never meant to retain classified information after leaving the vice presidency. Hurst stands by his report questioning Biden's age and mental competence, but recommending no criminal charges for the 81-year-old. Hurst testifies he did not sanitize his explanation nor disparage Biden unfairly. Both Biden and Trump are on the cusp of claiming their party's presidential nominations.
Most importantly, what I wrote is what I believe the evidence shows and what I expect jurors would perceive and believe. I did not sanitize my explanation.
Coming up, Julia McAndrews will be in with this week's weather forecast, and FM 88 Sports' John Boggess will be in with a recap of the week that was in Marshall athletics.
The best news program in the nation as honored by the National Broadcasting Society. More than 130 live Marshall sporting events every year. One of the top college radio stations in the nation. 50 years of broadcasting excellence. 88.1 WMUL FM.
Welcome back to Newscenter88's Weekend Recap. I'm Julie McAndrews, and now it's time for this week's weather forecast. After a week of summer-like heat and sun, we might experience some more consistent mild temps this coming week. Look forward to a beautiful sunny weekend, with Saturday highs being around 65 and lows being around 45 degrees. Sunday might be a little chillier, with highs around 60 and nighttime lows of around 30 degrees. As we look into the upcoming week, the first half will be partly cloudy, with temps sticking around the 50s and lows around the 30s. At the end of the week, expect some more clouds and scattered spring rain showers and more 50-degree weather. The weather word of the weekend is thermosphere. The thermosphere is the layer of the atmosphere extending from the top of the mesosphere to outer space. The thermosphere is around 320 miles thick, and temperatures steadily increase and can reach 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The International Space Station orbits Earth in this atmospheric layer. Thank you to weatherology.com for that information. That concludes this week's weather forecast. For News Center 88, I'm Julie McAndrews.
Thanks, Julia. Now John Boggess joins us with a recap of the week that was in Marshall athletics.
Thanks, Emma. The Marshall women's basketball team is headed to March Madness for the first time since 1997 after winning its first Sun Belt Conference championship. The team faced off against the James Madison Dukes Monday, defeating them in an overtime thriller 95-92 to claim the title. Marshall broke 8 Sun Belt Conference records in the championship run, including the most points in a tournament with 287 and the most three-point field goals made with 30. Marshall will learn its opponent in the first round of the NCAA tournament tomorrow, with the selection show beginning at 8 p.m. Marshall softball and baseball won in similar fashion on Sunday, blasting walk-off home runs to take a 5-4 victory. Marshall softball faced Indiana State in its final game of Marshall March Madness, with sophomore Bella Gerlach hitting the walk-off home run. The Corydon, Indiana native had a total of 4 RBI in the game, hitting a home run in the first inning and scoring a runner in the third as well. Gerlach leads the team in home runs and now has a total of 7 on the season. The Marshall softball team will play Game 1 of its first Sun Belt Conference series of the season Friday against Georgia Southern at Dot Hicks Field. The walk-off home run for Marshall baseball was hit by senior Owen Ayers, who did so in Game 3 of the series against Southeast Missouri State. Owen Ayers' team-leading 5th home run of the season was his only hit of the game. Marshall baseball then traveled to Charleston, West Virginia to face WVU at Go-Mart Ballpark, falling 2-11. Marshall took an early lead, scoring 2 runs in the first inning, but WVU would keep Marshall scoreless the remainder of the game. WVU would then score 5 in the bottom of the third to take the lead and to continue to grow its lead, scoring at least 1 run in the next 3 innings. WVU scored 1 more time in the 8th inning, and Marshall would not be able to respond to the dominant Mountaineer bats. Chad Heiner received the loss and is now 1-2, and Marshall's overall record sits at 6-10. It will play 2 more games against WVU, the next time being Wednesday in Morgantown, West Virginia. It also begins Sun Belt Conference action when it travels to face Southern Miss for a 3-game series Friday. Marshall basketball freshman Pete Moe II announced that he would be entering the transfer portal with 4 years of eligibility yesterday. It was also announced that sophomore guard Cam Crawford intends to enter the portal as well. Head coach Dan D'Antoni also told the Field of 68 that he plans to coach Marshall next season. D'Antoni is currently the oldest head coach in D1 basketball and will be 77 next season. That's all for the FM 88 Sports Report. For FM 88 Sports, I'm John Boggess.
That concludes this edition of Newscenter88's Weekend Recap. We'll be gone for spring break next week, but tune in again on March 30th for a weekly recap of the top stories around the globe and the tri-state area. You can watch this newscast anytime on JMC TV or WMUL Radio's YouTube channels. I'm Waylon Smith.
And I'm Emma Johnson. Have a great day.